Hello. Sometimes I sit and thinks, and sometimes I just sits. You may be familiar with that little phrase. It's often attributed to Winnie the Pooh. It's a phrase, however, that I always associate with my father. He had the quote framed on his office wall. In fact, he moved offices several times during his working life, from an office in Bulawayo in Zimbabwe to one in Durban in South Africa, and then in his last job to one in London. So much changed for him and for us as a family during those times. But the picture in the office was always the same. It travelled with him, and it will always remind me of him. I found myself thinking about it just a couple of days ago. I was sitting in our front room early one morning, looking out onto the garden, having just spent some time reading my Bible. As I sat there, our cat Tipsy came and sat beside me. And together, we just sat and looked out of the window. Now, I don't think Tipsy was thinking about very much at all. She seems remarkably gifted at just sitting and being. I, on the other hand, found my mind flitting from one thing to another. I'm not nearly as good as Tipsy at just sitting. But actually, just sitting is so important, especially when we consciously just sit with God. Not thinking, not saying anything, not doing anything, other than simply sitting in his presence. Just being with God. Another word for it is contemplation. It's actually surprisingly difficult to do, as we're so programmed as human beings to think. And what I find useful sometimes is just to come back to that place of sitting and repeat a prayer word with every breath. Sometimes I just repeat the word Jesus. Sometimes I might just say the words, Spirit, fill me. It doesn't really matter what the word is if it brings us consciously back into the presence of God. I've been trying to practice contemplation for several years now, and whilst I'm no master, I have begun to notice some of the fruits of it in my life. The depth of my relationship with God is increasing. A greater peace and assurance of his love. And an incredible sense often, as I sit, of just being held. That doesn't mean that I don't pray using my thoughts and words at other times. Those are important parts of prayer too. But I've come to realize how important it also is just to sit with God every day. There's a great story told by St. John Vianney, a French priest in the 17 and 1800s. You might have heard it, but I'm briefly going to read it to you. Listen well to this, my children, he says. When I first came to ours, there was a man who never passed the church without going in. In the morning on his way to work, and in the evening on his way home, he left his spade and pickaxe in the porch, and he spent a long time in adoration before the Blessed Sacrament. I asked him once what he said to our Lord during those visits. Do you know what he told me? Why? I say nothing to him. I look at him, and he looks at me. How beautiful is that? I encourage you, spend some time just sitting today and every day with God. Not thinking, not doing, just sitting. You looking at him and him looking at you, and allow his presence to change you.